So again, a lot of this will be kind of a review. And then when we're done with this, we'll talk about the equipment that's here and then start pulling out the shellfish and going through what we're gonna do with them. So what's step one? So step one, actually I already did, that you'll do. It's a new step one. Weigh it, right? And write it down so you have the weight. So we got 4.06 pounds right now. And then what's step two? So remove the wishbone. And one thing, when we do this, you'll want to have containers that you can put those categories in. So something to put scrap in, something that we would, if you're not going to keep it. So if we cut off like fat and skin from the front here, for example, then I'd want to keep that in the same container that I cut any fat away from back here. And that way I can weigh this afterward and find out what was the scrap. Again, the scrap being the stuff that we're gonna scrap. Yeah.
If you're making like a bone broth with the carcass, why don't you save the fat for that too?
Usually when you're making stock, you're gonna get rid of the fat. Unless you're making something like ramen or something like that, where they'll actually incorporate some of the fat into the stock. So trimming it just means there's less fat on top of the stock that you're then going to need to remove anyway. So again, if we were doing ramen or something like that, then you could leave it on there because that might be something you want. So again, I feel for where the wishbone is and make a cut on top of where I'm feeling it. And then if it's not broken, which this one, I think it's not broken. If it's not broken, then you can go right up to the top and then pull down, and that whole wishbone should come out. And where's the wishbone going to go? What could we do with it? So it could go into trimmings because we're going to use it. We could throw it in stock. Make sense? Or we can make a wish. That's true. Okay, that was number 2. Number 1 was? Whey chicken. Number 2 was? Number 3? French the wings. So again, cut the flap. One mistake that sometimes people make is get too close to the joint, right? So aim for right below where the meaty part of the drumette ends. So that way you get that part of the meat with the airline breast, but you're going to have a fairly decent sized piece of bone that can be exposed. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, if I just go to where it's getting smaller and cut straight down, and then go all the way around, do the chicken dance, use the back of the knife to scrape, make sure it's clean. And once I've got it to that point, then I can take that and make it taut and snap down, and it should pop off. If it doesn't, how do you know it didn't? The sound usually will go if it went well. If it doesn't, it's just kind of like, it's like you damaged somebody's ligaments or something like that. But what will you see when this comes off? That tells you like, oh, that didn't go right. You'll see the white cap on top of it, right? So, and a lot of times you could pull it off at that point, but let's see how this one, you see, it sounded like I damaged somebody's arm. Didn't really come off all that clean. Where's this going? So we could call this EP, right? So I'm gonna put it in that one. So you can see, it looks like most of it actually came off. That sounded bad, but I guess it wasn't as bad as it sounded. So it should be red like that on the tip, which tells you got that cartilage cap off. And we'll see the same thing when we do the leg. So again, cut that little flap, aim for that part of the wing where it's the meat starting to get thin. This one has been injured already. Not by me, which might make this a little wonky, but I think there's still enough. You can see the bones broken there. Oh, that definitely was closer to the damaged arm. See what's there? So you see white on it. So if that happens, if you use the knife, you usually can get this to pop up, and then you can get, if you have something to grab on with, then you can get it to come back off. And again, that would go into that cap I would just throw into the scrap. Okay, so 3 steps. Number 1, number 2, wishbone. Number 3, French wings. I don't know, that was a little wishy-washy. Number 4, so we're gonna French the legs. This is probably the best time to do it. When we did it last time, I think I showed you guys splitting here and then doing it. The more chicken you have to hold on to, the easier it is to do the legs. And so we're gonna French the legs, and you wanna cut where it's thin on the leg all the way around. So above that, in the, not at the very end of it where that cap is. So a lot like the wing, we go all the way around. And again, scrape to make sure we've cut everything. And there's more connective tissue here. So you might have some tendons pop up as you do this. That's not uncommon. Anybody cook their Frenched legs? They contract back down, this. So you'll sometimes see the drumettes called as like lollipops or so, like chicken lollipops or something, because it just pulls all down to one end. Okay, and then the big thing to remember about Frenching the legs is which side to hit. So notice those 2 distinct bones like sticking up on that side. That is not the side you want to hit. You want to hit the opposite side, which usually if you have it so the back is facing you, that side's going to be facing up. And again, if we keep it all whole, it should be that we can get it to kind of sit straight up from us. As if you're doing it at an angle or something, you're not really going to hit the cap as well. And what we're trying to do when you do this is you're trying to hit that cartilage cap that's on the end of this leg and get it to pop up. And once it pops up, then you can pull it off. It's difficult to get off without getting it popped up. And using the back of the knife and just hitting up against it hard is, notice I've got my thumb behind the blade here, and I'm close to the chicken leg, and I've got the chicken leg over on the edge of my cutting board, so my hand's not in the way, and I've got more leverage there than if I do this. Does that make sense? So once it pops up, and a lot of times you might feel it or hear it, then you can just pull that off. And this could go in trimmings, because there is cartilage and stuff in there, so it would add to a stock. So same thing on the other leg. And we want to make sure it's totally clear. Sometimes, again, those tendons might be stuck on. And then turn it over again, and same thing. And again, that would go in trimmings. So we've got wings Frenched, legs Frenched, wishbone gone, we weighed it. What do we do next? So separate the legs from the main body, first marking the skin so that we keep skin on each part in case we want it for whatever we're making. So notice I'll usually do it this way. I just turn the knife upside down and stick it right in between the 2 of them, and then just like saw up and it'll cut it. But you can also do it this way as well, whichever way you're more comfortable doing it. And we just want to make sure we've got it cut all the way down. And then once we've done that, then what's next? So we want to disjoint it. So you look for those U bones here, get on the leg side of that bone, and just make a slash down and try and keep the angle the same as the bone. Same thing on the other side. The angle's totally different because you're on the other side of the chicken, but so like this and like that. And then to disjoint it, if you put your finger along the thigh bone and just turn, that's like you're supporting it the most, and it should disjoint pretty easily, as opposed to like trying to grab this and twist it up or something. So what I'm saying is that if I just put my finger right up against the thigh bone here and then turn, that should pop up pretty easily on both sides. So now we've got it disjointed. Cut a little more here. Now what?
That would be removing the breast.
Okay, so we're going to remove the breast by turning the chicken around. And then initially when I take it off, I usually would cut the skin first, kind of lightly, just to make sure, again, I've got the skin for each breast on it, because the skin can move around a lot as you do that. And then when we go to take the breast off, where's the common pitfall here?
The keel bone.
So the keel bone's right here. What do we know about the keel, one end of the keel?
Cut through it in the end.
You can cut through it very easily. Which end?
The opening.
This end.
Yeah.
Right. It's a bone here, and then it turns to cartilage as it goes that way. And the cartilage is not super strong, so if you cut down very hard, you could go right through it. And then when you go take the breast off, if you look at the other side of the breast, you're going to see there's cartilage on it. Right? So we don't want to do that. So you can take it off after if you did go through it, but ideally we don't. So you don't need to cut really hard. The big thing is try to stay up against the keel. So angle toward it. I'm taking the breast off on this side toward me. And again, do this in whatever position is most comfortable for the motion that you make with a knife. So if you like going away from yourself more or toward yourself more with it, turn the chicken so you can do whatever is comfortable to you. So I could turn this around and be going on the other way. So I make that cut down, and then as you go down, you're just gonna hit bone, which is you're hitting partially the keel, and you're also hitting the rib bones. And then we just want to use the tip of the knife to follow those rib bones. This is where I'll switch my grip and turn around this way to get the top part of it by cutting away. And then I'm going to follow the bone that is in the neck area down to look for where's the joint between the wing and that bone. And there's going to be some cartilage there when I get to it, so you can see the cartilage right here. Note, as I did that, this is the tendon for the chicken tender, and it's like right about here connected. So when you do that, you'll cut it. So you'll see white beforehand, and this tendon, depending on how you handle the chicken as you're doing this, could come off because there's not much holding it on anymore. And so one of the things with doing butchery like this is, if we're trying to keep it on, you want to handle this stuff, but you don't want to handle it rough, because if you do, then you're going to start pulling things apart. A little bit like when we talked about the salmon, about how to deal with your offhand. Like if you push more or pull too much, then you start pulling things apart. So then if I cut right where that joint is, then I should have an airline breast with skin on it. You can see the tenderloin is still connected there, and there's a tiny bit of cartilage right there. So I hit something, there it is. So if that's there, I can get it off by just going underneath it and cutting that off, and that would go, actually that could go into trim. And then this is EP. And then the second side, so I do it the same, initially facing the same way, but some people might be more comfortable turning it around now. You know, if I went like this and now it's on this side again. So again, do it whatever way is most comfortable to you. And I do it like this partially because the keel bone's on this end, and then the front is where there's a whole bunch of breast meat that I could just cut straight through, and then I'm going to lose it and my yield's going to be a little bit lower. Or you could cut down to the end of the keel. And I don't know if everybody can see the keel here, but that's the keel bone there. It ends here, but the chicken breast keeps going. So if I take and cut down to the end of it, and then where it ends, just cut around it and push the meat this way, then when I take off this breast, all the meat that was in the front of it is going to be on that second breast. And there's not a bunch left in front of it. Make sense? So cut down, and then for me, I turn it around at this point. So I just do that part, this way because I can see what's happening really easily. And then I'll turn it around. And again, I'm going to try to stay up against those bones by angling toward them. And then following that one bone down to look for where that joint is. And I think I've told you guys, I usually grab the wing with my finger underneath so I know where it is. Because I know sometimes people have cut and they think the wing's over here, but it's over there, and you cut it off. So by knowing where it is with your hand, that can help prevent that from happening. And then look for where the joint is and cut in that joint to get the second breast off. And again, I'd check to see, did I get any cartilage? I don't see any there. It looks clean there too. So breast number 2. And then we're going to turn it over. And if we lift those legs up, it should be really clear where the oysters are. And by the way, when you cut the skin, if you cut it very far down, then that kind of lines it up too. So it should be like pretty much straight across from where you ended your cuts before. So I'm going to cut right above those oysters all the way across. What step is this? Step 6? Step 11. And then we're going to pull that back to look for where the oyster is so I can make that cut on the oyster and push it up so I remove the oyster when I remove the leg. So I pull it back and notice there's that long muscle that kind of leads you toward where the oyster is. And there's a little bump there. That's the end of the oyster. So if I make a little cut on that and then use my finger to push it up, and then at this point you can start pulling this leg away. And I think it helps to get it off if you're pulling at the same time that you're cutting. And just stay right next to the backbone and the leg should come off. So same thing on this side. Pull it back, look for where the oyster is, and make a cut on that oyster. Oh, we have oysters. We have real oysters tonight. Chicken oysters and real oysters. And then just stay next to the backbone to take off that leg. So this, again, would go here into trimmings. And I'm going to take that off and put it in there. If there's extra skin and stuff on the legs, I usually would just trim it off. It kind of depends on what you want to do with the legs if you want that extra fat for some reason. So then the last thing, and again, we didn't do this initially, but a lot of people did it on their final, is splitting the legs and thigh. And so we're looking for that fat line on them. And you want to go on the leg side of the fat line about 1/4 of an inch. And I usually just make a little cut in so I can see the joint, so I know I'm cutting in the right place. The one thing is if you just cut straight through it, oftentimes you're going to cut the end of one of these bones, and then you're going to have cartilage on one side that'll fall out when you cook it, because if it starts breaking down that cartilage, it'll fall out. But if you get in between the bones, you can cut without cutting the cartilage. And then we've got that Frenched drumette and a thigh. And same thing here. Look for the joint and cut in between. So we got the seconds of these. And again, these would all be EP. So one thing that we probably should remove, which we haven't been doing, and maybe we should do this too for the final so we have good numbers, that tip is usually taken off. And to do that, you can see there's a joint there, right? And if you just kind of angle into where that joint is, you should be able to cut it off without cutting much cartilage like I just did. And this would go into what we could use for the stock again. And this one's all messed up because it's broken. So that would go in there, and then that could be considered edible portion because you could use it for like chicken wings or something like that. So let's see what the numbers. Someone got a pen? EP is 2.99 pounds. And then scrap is 0.136, or so 0.14. And trimmings are 0.91. So from that, we could calculate what the edible portion percent is. Is that it right there?
Yeah.
What's the number?
73.645.
And so if we, let's say we paid, how much, anybody bought whole chickens recently? Like $2 a pound or something like that? Maybe, somewhere around there. So let's say we did, let's just use an easy number, that we paid $2 a pound for the chicken. So if you take $2 and divide it by that number, 0.7 whatever, that's how much you really paid for the part you're going to use. Does that make sense? And then again, where it gets more complicated is how much is the breast worth versus how much is the wing versus how much is the leg versus how much is the thigh, because they're not, what does that work out to be? It's like, do $2 divided by 0.7, whatever that number was, 0.7 something.
73.6. $1.46.
Divide it by it. $2
$2
divided by
and
point,
5%
0.7 whatever. It's going to get bigger.
73.64%.
Yeah, so $2 divided by 0.7364.
$3.71.
So that's what you're really paying for the edible part. Does that make sense? So if you were looking at a whole chicken and it was $2, and then right next to it there was chicken breast that was on sale for $2.50 or something like that, it's cheaper to buy the chicken breast than it is to buy the chicken, because if you fabricate the chicken, then you're going to end up paying $2.70 whatever for it. And that happens at times, that it's cheaper to buy fabricated stuff than to buy unfabricated, although you're not going to be making chicken stock or something like that if you buy chicken breast, unless you're going to use that to make chicken stock.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, it does. Sometimes I look at both the whole and the fabricated, and I'm like, I'll buy the whole because it's cheaper than, and I'll do whatever. But that makes
Yeah, it kind of depends on.
Yeah.
I mean, normal, like you would think it would always be that way, but it's not. It's not always that way. I think, actually, I think I'm confusing classes again. But pork loin is another good example of that. Like if you buy a bone-in pork loin, it's usually more expensive than if you bought a boneless pork loin. And the reason is the boneless pork loins are like mass produced, and the bone-in pork loins are not as commonly requested. And so the distribution system is completely different. And so it ends up costing you more to buy a boneless. And if your plan was to use boneless, pork loin for something, then it doesn't make any sense to buy a bone-in pork loin, because you're paying more money for it and then you're wasting that money. Okay, so we feel good about the fine. So that's what you're going to do for the final. You're going to weigh it. You're going to fabricate it like this. We're going to keep track of the numbers so that we can do percentages, and we'll do it for the whole class. And I'll give you the numbers for the whole class without names afterwards. So if you're curious, like how is my yield versus other, again, some of it is not entirely from us. So some of it can be the chicken. But at least it gives you a little bit of a sense of, how is your yield versus others. And again, we're going to French the legs, and we're going to split the leg and thigh and take the wing tips off and so forth. Make sense? So that's going to be in 2 weeks that we'll do that. But today, we're going to deal with shellfish, right?